What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. And today we are kind of doing the first mod, fix, repair in the new garage with actual tools. Yes, we have Dad's Jeep in here and we installed the start stop eliminator, but we literally used no tools. Today we are actually doing some work where we're going to be using tools and taking things apart. And today we do not have my TRX, but we have my good buddy's TRX here in the garage today, and we're going to be putting on some very, very cool parts. This is the new AFE Momentum GT in Raisin Hell Red. That is a long name to say, but it is a full replacement for the factory airbox here on the TRX. And it is in a very awesome red color. I'll show you all the parts and pieces, and then we will get the factory airbox torn off this thing. I'll probably just time lapse us ripping it off since we have done that already on the channel, but then we'll probably actually do a detailed install on this thing, and then we'll go out and at least drive up and down the road so we can hear how the supercharger whine sounds, because yes, AFE claims it makes 28 plus horsepower with this, but come on, guys, we're really doing this so we can hear a little more supercharger whine while driving this thing down the road, because the TRX is a little bit muted compared to most of the other Hellcat powered vehicles. So this should hopefully make a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, more supercharger whine. So guys, we've got all of the parts and pieces laid out here, and in the garage lighting, this almost looks orange with the LED lights, but I can assure you this is a really nice red color here, even though, like I said, it looks very orange. But here is that full replacement airbox again in that awesome red. And one thing I really like about this is it does have the rubber seal like the factory airbox, which makes a nice solid seal against the hood. So it is actually forcing air into the airbox, into the filters, through our tubes, and into the engine. Now, as you can see with all of these, we've got really nice large open tubing here for the air to flow through. We've got really nice couplers here. We've got really nice quality band clamps that are the non-pinch style that have the nice little piece here. Everything is just obviously AFE quality like you would assume. So guys, I'm gonna throw the camera up on the hood and then we will get this thing ripped apart, and then, like I said, we will get this new AFE thrown on this truck. All right, guys, so we've got everything pulled off of the factory intake side of things. The only thing that you have to, I guess, cut or, trim instead of just removing hardware is the factory breather hose that goes from the intake tube back to the valve, I guess, on the back of the driver's side valve cover. So guys, here is that tube I'm talking about, and it goes back here onto this solenoid back here. You can see the hosed barbed end where that originally went. Now, the best way to do that is just using a single-sided razor blade. And as you can see, I've just got a little slit here on the side of the nylon tube. That allows that to open up enough where you can slide it off, but you haven't destroyed the hose. So if you ever want to go back to stock, this can be slid back over that. You can slide a piece of heat shrink on and it will be as OEM as it possibly can. So you aren't cutting, hacking, destroying anything that is factory. Everything can be put back together if for whatever reason you want to go back to stock. Now on to the new intake. I've got most of the stuff pre-assembled. We've got our clamps on. All right, guys, so first thing we are installing here is the coupler for the throttle body to that intake tube. And again, AFE quality, it has little indentions where they want you to put it, so you can't even do it wrong. And this is a 11mm nut here. And then we will do our final tightening by hand, just so we can kind of feel out how tight this thing is. And now guys, AFE does include a new hose that goes from that rear solenoid on the driver's valve cover installed there to the new intake tube. So we'll get that thing slid on. Now I did throw just a little bit of silicone spray here in this thing so it will slide on, or at least we can get it slid on all the way without as much of a fight. All right guys, next we've got the large kind of Y tube here that again, AFE has it already figured out for you. They've got a little indention notch right here on the intake tube, which matches up with that coupler there on the throttle body. So you can't mess it up. You'd really have to be working hard to mess it up. So we're going to install that. Well, first we probably should put a clamp on it. That would be important. So you can mess it up if you are talking to a camera instead of just working. So slide your clamp on first, and then you can slide your tube on. And guys, the only thing you kind of are watching for, wanting to be cautious about, is making sure this coupler is slid all the way on that tube. Again, you can see the top, but you need to feel around to the bottom of it again to make sure that thing is slid all the way on there. And then we will tighten down by hand just so we can feel that clamp out a little bit better, because you can over tighten these since we are just clamping down onto plastic tubing. And again, we've got our hose here off of that solenoid that we are going to get slid onto the barb on the back of this intake. And I guess the only thing there we need to watch for is making sure this isn't too long and have itself kinked. This one makes a nice S curve, which doesn't have any kink, so we are going to be totally fine there and ready to continue forward with our install. Now guys, one thing I did not show you is on the bottom of the intake, or the intake box, we've got the 4 rubber little isolators, and then at the end we've got the mounting tabs with the 2 grommets and 2 aluminum sleeves that we'll need to get slid in before we throw this thing on. But once those are all in place, we will just set this thing on in the exact way we pulled it off the truck originally. We've got our 2 clamps back here, or our brackets, I guess, that we need to get it slid around. And then guys, we'll get our hardware that goes on each side of that crossbar. We've got a 13 on each side, the 10 on each side, and then our 10 millimeter bolts here on the back side. And then guys, we've got 10 millimeters at the very front of this that we will get reinstalled, and then this airbox will be fully tightened. And of course, like I've been saying this whole time, AFE quality, the bolt holes line up perfectly. I'm not having to wallow bolt holes and try and bend and pry. It just lines up like it should. All right, and now we are ready for filters. AFE is pretty cool because they've got little locking tabs here on the filters that are going to slide into the housing, and you will press them in until they obviously kind of snap in, lock in, whatever you want to call it. And I guess the only thing I can say here is make sure your clamps are turned the right way so they aren't facing down, so when you go to tighten those, you aren't trying from underneath. I've got them pointing up in a nice way so they can be easily installed and removed in the future. All All right guys, we are now ready to install our passenger side intake tube. This is the one without the temp sensor since that lives on the other side. Now again, you're gonna kind of be wanting to make sure your clamps are easily accessible, and if you're OCD like me, you're gonna wanna make sure both of the clamps are facing the same way here. Again, it matters nothing other than how it looks under the hood. So we've got both of our clamps on that lower tube, both facing the same way, and we're gonna be able to slide this tube into there, and then at the same time, we're going to be trying to slide it into the air filter. And it really wasn't too bad to do that. Now again, this is gonna be where you're really gonna be wanting to make sure you've got the rubber or silicone boots slid all the way up to the edge of the piping. If you don't have it on the bottom, it could slip off. You just really wanna make sure you've got that thing fully installed before you tighten the clamps down. All right guys, last but not least, we've got our driver's side tube. Now it does state in the instructions that it wants the clamp facing the front of the truck, so it's not any closer to the alternator pulley. We luckily have our inside clamp facing the same way, so those are again going to look very nice, symmetrical for me and the owner just to know that they are installed nicely. But again, another note it has is you may need to remove the fuse box cover to be able to get that tube initially installed for a little bit more clearance. And yeah, that definitely makes it a little bit nicer to get the tube installed. And again, you're trying to install that bottom tube at the same time you are installing that upper tube while making sure your clamps stay in place and are slid on all the way. And again, guys, this side is our temp sensor side, so we'll need to make sure that you've got that wiring not tucked under something where you're not going to be able to get to it. And again, make sure our tube, our couplers are slid all the way on before we go and tighten those down. Now that we've got both of those clamps installed, fully seated, everything good, do not forget your intake temp sensor, which again plugs right into that intake tube that we just installed. And we will throw our fuse box cover back on. So now that we've got the intake fully installed, we are ready for this front cowl closeout panel. And if you're wondering why this needs to go back on, this is actually a very functional part of the RAM air system. The air, yes, comes in through the upper hood scoop and again is forced into the airbox, but the other portion of that is air being rammed through the front of the truck, through the grill, and then it actually goes up through these veins here and gets shoved additionally into the airbox. So not only from up top, but down low. And without this piece, this is actually kind of a air duct, if you will. It helps that air go up, get forced through those vents and into the airbox. So it is pretty important here on the TRX. Now, one thing the instructions want us to do is drill out these upper holes on both sides of this panel so we can install their nice little fasteners here, but I've kind of pre-checked and they line up absolutely perfectly. So if you'd like to on your install, absolutely follow the instructions, drill those out to a 1/2 inch hole. My personal and this truck, I'm going to leave them as they are, just so, again, if in the future it needed to go back to stock, you wouldn't have anything cut and drilled, because again, their holes line up really nice. I don't know if they're just accounting for some of them being in a different position slightly and those not lining up. On this truck, with this cowl panel, everything lines up as it should, so we're just going to set this back into place on the truck. And the only thing you're really kind of watching here is on the edges. There's a couple of portions that kind of tuck underneath the fenders. And then you've got to make sure all of the 4 tabs fit into the airbox. The factory airbox has that also. I've seen one truck come in from another state in for service that didn't have that piece installed. It was flopped up on top. I took this whole thing off and took care of it. So just something to watch for, even if you're factory airbox with the truck. Now we are going to install all of those factory push clips back into the factory locations. And again, AFE does provide some cool looking little hardware with their name on it that will go up into this top portion. So we'll get those installed once we get all of this installed. Now guys, last but not least, here are those, the hardware that I was talking about. It's actually a really cool little stainless or aluminum hex-headed screw with a really cool AFE Advanced Flow Engineering little washer with a little rubber O-ring here that we will be, the finishing touches on this AFE Momentum intake. They thread down into the holes here, or the threaded holes on AFE's intake. And again, we didn't even drill the holes out like we were instructed to, because I really don't see a need to. This went straight into the threaded hole and again, had no issues. So I don't really see the need to drill out those holes, but man, those are actually pretty cool looking here with all of the other stainless clamps and stuff. Well guys, that was a pretty darn straightforward install. Everything fit perfectly. We weren't wallowing holes, we weren't drilling things out, we weren't chopping things up to get it to fit. And the fact that this AFE Momentum GT intake works with the factory hood is one of the reasons why I went with AFE Superstock at the time, because it still uses the factory intake, the factory hood, shoving it into the hood. A lot of the aftermarket intakes have filters sitting in different places that aren't utilizing the fact that we have a functional RAM air hood. So again, love the design, love how the setup is, and this should flow even better than the factory intake, even my AFE Superstock, since we have much larger tubing and everything working together. And again, simple install. You don't need all the fancy Milwaukee power tools. Everything would have went on extremely easily and quickly by hand. So guys, we're gonna go take this thing out, make a quick trip down the road, at least to hear the supercharger whine now. The only other thing AFE wants you to do is after the first 100 to 300 miles, give it a good once over, check the clamps, make sure nothing's loosened up, wiggled loose, and obviously take a quick look at it at each oil change, obviously, just to make sure everything is there and happy. So yeah guys, we're gonna go take this thing out on the road and see what kind of noise it makes. Well guys, I gotta give a big thanks to my buddy here for letting me play with his money and his TRX today and getting to show you guys another really awesome option for our TRX for the intake side of things. So guys, thank you so much for watching today and kind of doing our first mod install here in the new garage. And guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and we'll catch you guys next time.